Now, in this part, we will learn as to what action disciplinary authority will have to take if the procedure has been followed by the inquiry officer. Now, many a times the disciplinary authority wrongly presumed that the inquiry report submitted by the inquiry officer is a fait accompli, not requiring any further examination at all. That's not the correct view. Now, report of the inquiry officer is not binding on the disciplinary authority or punishing authority, and he should not mechanically accept the report. Of course, the report of the inquiry officer with conclusions have great value because it is the inquiry officer who heard the witnesses and the charge employee by holding the inquiry into the case. However, disciplinary authority is under an obligation to apply his own mind to the records of the case and to take an independent view of the matter after giving due consideration to the findings of the inquiry officer. Now, he should examine the deposition of the witnesses and himself conclude whether the evidences has a ring of truth, is cogent or not, is credible and trustworthy or otherwise. He can differ with the inquiry officer by recording his own reason. Now, the various possibilities that can arise on the examination of the report by the disciplinary authority can be explained with the help of the diagram shown on the screen. Now, broadly speaking, the inquiry officer report on each charge has two possibilities. Either he concluded the charge proved or he concluded the charge as not proved. Now, if the disciplinary authority disagrees with the findings of the inquiry officer, then the decision is shown in the second column. You can see that in case the inquiry officer holds the charge as not proved, the disciplinary authority could hold it proved. On the other hand, if the inquiry officer holds the charge as proved, the disciplinary authority, while disagreeing, could hold the charge as not proved. Let us now see if the disciplinary authority agrees with the inquiry officer's finding. If the DA agrees with the findings of the inquiry officer, then final view is shown in the column 3. From the table, you may note that disagreement with the inquiry officer's report could be favorable also to the employee. For example, in the case where the inquiry officer holds the charge as proved, but the disciplinary authority disagrees and holds the charge as not proved, certainly it would be favorable to the employee, isn't it? With the discussion so far, you can appreciate that the disciplinary authority should read the report very carefully, and whether he agrees or disagrees with the inquiry officer's report, the next stage is forwarding the report to the charge officer or the employee. Now, Rule 15 Sub-Rule 2 of the CCA rules provide that the disciplinary authority shall forward the inquiry officer's report together with its own tentative reasons of disagreement, if any, to the employee. Now, please see the text of the Rule 15(2). Now, let us assume that the disciplinary authority disagrees with the findings of the inquiry officer. Then, as discussed, the disciplinary authority will forward A, the inquiry officer's report, and 2, the tentative reasons of disagreement to the employee, who would be allowed 15 days time for making a representation if he so desires. Even when the disciplinary authority agrees with the report, in that case also the report of the inquiry officer will be forwarded to the employee, but there will be, of course, no tentative reasons of disagreement in this case. Now, DOPT, via their office memorandum dated 12th November 2010, have clarified that the disciplinary authority, while forwarding the inquiry officer's report, etc., should not mention in the forwarding communication phrases like articles of charge is fully proved or article of charge is fully substantiated, which could be construed to mean that the disciplinary authority is biased even before considering the representation of the charge officer. The report of the inquiry officer and the tentative reasons for disagreement by the disciplinary authority are to be forwarded to the charge employee irrespective of whether it is favorable or not, as we learned earlier. After the representation of the charge officer on the inquiry officer's report and the tentative reasons for disagreement have been received by the disciplinary authority, he is now required to consult the Union Public Service Commission or the Central Vigilance Commission wherever necessary. From the year 2011 onwards, after the issuance of the DOPT's office memorandum dated 26 September 2011, the second stage advice of the Central Vigilance Commission in disciplinary matters has been dispensed with. However, in those cases where consultation with UPSC is not required, as per the existing instructions rules, the second stage consultation with the CVC should continue. You know that in the case of employees of the public sector undertaking, banks, autonomous bodies, etc., where consultation with UPSC is not required, the second stage consultation with CVC would continue. This has been done to make the process simpler and faster. Now, according to Rule 15(3)(a), while referring the matter to UPSC, the disciplinary authority will forward to the Union Public Commission the following documents. Number 1, the inquiry officer's report plus disagreement if any. Number 2, the disciplinary authority's comments on the employee's representation which he has received plus disagreement note if any. And third, all other case records of the inquiry in original in the prescribed proforma prescribed by DOPT's office memorandum dated 28th December 2018. Now, beside all this, a statement showing full particulars of the charged employee about his age, qualification, the present post held by him, his substantive appointment, his position in regard to seniority and promotion, his pay scale, stage at which he is drawing his present pay, and the date of next increment, etc. should also be enclosed. The folder containing his confidential record should also be forwarded to the Union Public Service Commission. The disciplinary authority should bear in mind at this stage a very important thing. While referring the case to the Union Public Commission, he should not express any opinion regarding the penalty to be imposed on the officer, be it a major penalty case or a minor penalty case. The same procedure as we have discussed with UPSC should also be followed for the Central Vigilance Commission wherever Central Vigilance Commission is consulted. Now, after referring the matter to the UPSC or CVC, when their advice comes, the Commission's advice comes back to the disciplinary authority, then the Rule 15 Sub-Rule 3 says that on receipt of the advice of the UPSC, a copy of the advice thereof shall be forwarded to the employee and he shall be given an opportunity of making a representation against it if he so desires within 15 days. Now, the disciplinary authority should pass the final order only after considering the representation filed by the employee on the advice of the UPSC or the Central Vigilance Commission. And that is the last step. Now, please remember, the final order in a disciplinary proceedings must be a speaking order in writing, should contain reasons for the conclusion reached. It should be signed by the disciplinary authority himself or herself by giving his name and designation. The only exception, as we discussed earlier also, is where the disciplinary authority is the president. In that case, any officer authorized under the Authentication, Orders and Other Instrument Rules 2002 can sign the order of the president. Now, reasons for disagreement with the advice of the UPSC or CVC should also be mentioned in the final order, and therefore you may also refer to the Rule 17 of the CCA Rules 1965, which specifically mentioned that the final order passed by the disciplinary authority should contain a brief statement of the reasons of non-acceptance of the advice of the Commission. Any order is not speaking order, it must mention the reason, and sometimes we have seen that the disciplinary authority, merely by using words like the undersigned has applied my mind, or on an objective assessment, or I have very carefully considered the facts and records of the case but have not found any merit in the case of the employee. By mentioning these sentences, it doesn't become a speaking order unless you elaborate the reasons also in that order. The failure to give reasons could lead to a very justifiable complaint that there was a breach of natural justice. So, let us now summarize what we have learned so far. First thing, on receipt of the inquiry officer's report, the disciplinary authority should first ensure that all the documents mentioned in the Rule 14 Sub-Rule 23 are enclosed with the report or not. And next is, it should check whether the procedure for holding the inquiry has been followed or not. If non-observance of the procedure has resulted in violation of the constitutional provision or statutory provision or failure of justice, the case should be remitted back to the inquiry officer for further inquiry and report. Now, if the procedure has been followed, then the discipline authority should forward the report of the inquiry officer along with tentative reasons of disagreement, if any, to the employee. Then comes the consultation with the UPSC or CVC, as the case may be. On receipt of the UPSC or CVC's comment, forward the advice of the CPC or the UPSC to the employee to enable him to submit a representation on this advice of the UPSC CVC. And the representation of the employee on the advice of the UPSC or CVC should be examined, and finally the final order, which should be a speaking order, should be passed by the discipline authority mentioning his name, designation, etc. So that was all from my side. Thank you very much. Hope you liked the presentation and benefited from the same. See you next time.